This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Here we are. We're going to be, this is episode, the second episode of our top 10 list for 2025. And again, before I name the final four, I would like just for a moment again to thank you, all of my friends out there that have supported Brother David and myself through our journey in 2025 on Body Bags. And I'm sure if 2026 is going to be anything like 2025 was, we'll have much, much more to talk about. With that said, I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and for the end of 2025, this is Body Bags. Well, Dave, I would have to say that if I could, I don't know, give kind of a visual image here, I'd say that the last four, or our top four episodes for most downloaded over the course of 2025, I'd have to say that it's a great big exclamation point on a series of cases or a series of events, rather, that seemed like they would never end. And
wow,
they came to an abrupt end. And we had more answers, certainly, at the end of the year than when we started. I think that in any criminal investigation, and certainly with forensics, you want that kind of a culminative event, and again, we don't use the word closure on this show because we don't believe in it. It's not something that's real. But at least it has given us an idea, and certainly the families that are involved in these cases, an idea as to which way the wind is blowing, and maybe to a certain extent, what the future holds, man.
You know, Joe, I think that one of the interesting tidbits on the program this year was the amount of time, not just you and I, but crime coverage in general, spent on the Bryan Kohberger case. And, you know, there's a couple of moments in crime where you kind of remember where you were when something happened, like the O.J. Simpson trial when they said not guilty. And, you know, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit, those types of things. And with regard to one of the biggest cases this year, the Idaho murders, it was the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger, but it wasn't just the sentencing. A lot of us were hoping that at sentencing there would be allocution. He would actually be forced to say what he did and maybe why, but at least what he did, you know, specifically walking in the house, doing what we wanted to hear. That I felt like it was owed. I felt like that. I cannot believe they didn't make him do that, Joe, as part of the deal.
On one hand, and you know my thoughts about this, I agree with it, because the template that I always have in my mind about any kind of allocution always goes back to BTK, where he was compelled by the courts in Kansas to say specifically what he had done. And there's all kinds of legalese involved in this, and how, you know, they say, you know, there's several people that have said over time you can't actually compel them to do that. Or let me rephrase that. It's not that you can't compel them. It's there's certain points of leverage that you have to have, the gears of everything, in order to set this up so that the court can then leverage him into saying it. And for whatever reason, the prosecution, the courts, however you want to frame it, they didn't have the will to do it.
Right.
But I look at this, and that brings us to episode, the fourth most downloaded episode. That brings me to the family of Kaylee Goncalves, because with the fourth, though he did not allocute, there was a certain, let's see, how do I say this? There was a certain amount of it's not joy. I don't know really how to. There was something that came full circle in that moment to sit there and watch him with those dead eyes, kind of squirm, as Alivea, Kaylee's sister, stood there at the lectern, and that she directed her comments at him.
Yep.
And just said precisely what she wanted. There was no like weeping. There was no, kind of circumventing what the reality was for her. It was dead on. She was like General Patton, that knew that she had an objective and she didn't care what got in the way. She was going to make her voice heard in this environment. And that's kind of summed up in the way that we entitled this episode, Dave. And and this is again the fourth one. And this is, kind of loosely paraphrasing what she said, but the title of this was Delusional, Pathetic, Average, You're Nothing, Failed Rapper, Bryan Kohberger. And, it really did put that exclamation point on this case. I think we had heard a lot from other people, but Alivea is like one of these people that kind of floats in out of the mist. You don't really, she is one of these characters that had not really, and I'm not diminishing her by saying characters, but I'm looking at this from a narrative perspective. If we're watching a play, almost Shakespearean here, where she all of a sudden just kind of, walks into the stage and she just drops the hammer of the gods at this moment in time. That's, for me, out of all of the episodes in the top 10, this is probably the one that really grabbed me by my throat and brought us back to the reality of what this family had gone through at the hands of this monster, Dave.
One of the things about this case, Joe, the Goncalves family is the reason we know a lot of the information we know, because from the very beginning, they were the ones who spoke out. It was Kaylee's mom and dad who went on TV because they were frustrated, and they didn't always come off the best, but they were. The thing is that you could understand why, they were what they were dealing with, the shock and the emotional pain, anguish, and just frustration at everything. And when Alivea Goncalves talking about her sister, there was one phrase that she said, and I thought it was really dead on. She said, "You orchestrated this like you thought you were God. Now look at you begging a courtroom for scraps. You spent months preparing, and still all it took was my sister and a sheath." That encapsulates so much.
Yeah. And that's something that, that it's there. It's kind of like the distillation of spirits. You get down to the root of it. You get there to that point where if anyone could say something, that power, that's contained in that hit, it's really, he's hard to read, I think. And that, there's been a lot made out of that, with those dead, hollow eyes, his kind of hooded stare that he has, that he gazes out at everybody in a very menacing way.
Yeah.
And, for that moment in time, he was not the most dangerous person in that room.
Right.
He really wasn't. And I wouldn't presume to frame the Goncalveses as dangerous people. However, I think that taken on the whole, you look at what they had been through. There's a term I like to use when life has been really bad for me, and I'll say it feels as though I've been drugged through a keyhole. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. And for this family in particular, where their child, their sister, is gone forever and ever. Amen. We make a lot in forensics, and for those that work as investigators, saying that that we speak for those that can no longer speak for them. We give those who no longer have a voice in the matter. Any attempt that I have ever made is incredibly feeble compared to what we saw Alivea Goncalves do at that lectern that day. When she really went right to the heart of the matter and described him about, who he was, what he was, what he had done to their family, and just ripping it to shreds. You don't, and I would not want to know. I would not want to know the quiet conversations that they had amongst them as a family, when they sit around and they, what in the world are we going to do? And I think that it goes back to the dad. He was like, well, I know what we're not going to do. We're not going to sit here and and issue forth lamentations and just, tear our clothing and all that. We're going to get up and we're going to sally forth. Right. And we're going to do what we have to do in order to get peace in this set of circumstances, because I think that at the end of the day, they felt like they owed it to this child that was gone and that they were robbed of.
I think, and to the others, I think they felt like there was such a void of what was being presented. There was a lot of chatter going on about what took place in that house, but there wasn't a lot of information coming from the sources that they needed it from. But I did want to ask you about this, because when this case first broke, there was she wasn't the coroner, but she was the public, the elected official, right? Who said that she was a coroner. She's the elected coroner. Yeah. And also an attorney. Right. And yet she went in and said that they had all been killed in their sleep. Now, she walked the crime scene and had the temerity to say they were all killed in their sleep. And now what we know of the crime scene, of what took place in there, that the families actually knew a lot more, than we were all being told. Not like anybody owes us anything. I'm not suggesting that. It's just that what that woman said, she should have just kept her mouth shut if she's going to say something like that.
Let me take it one step further. If you like that one, I got another one for you. If that's what she said at that moment in time, and remember, that was just within, I guess we could render it down to within hours. It was certainly days of this horrific slaughter. That was the first bit of information that had been released to the public. Just imagine how insulting that is to the family and families when they suddenly discover, Dave, that that none of that was reality. And because they have information that comes to them in these private conversations that they have with folks, and suddenly all that stuff that is said early on, because, when you say that someone died in their sleep, that implies a peaceful passing. Exactly. And I can tell you this was anything but peaceful, and it was horrific. And the information that came out later, which we're going to cover in just a moment or two, was anything but placid. There was no solemnity in it. There was no hope that they had quietly passed on in their sleep. They went to a very, very dark spot. And I think therein lies some of the impetus that drove the family in particular to get up there and address him face to face, eye to eye, staring directly into the face of the devil. Well, Dave, shifting our focus back across the country geographically, but yet still dealing with a family that has mourned for several years now. Our number 3 entry into the top 10 most downloaded episodes of Body Bags, comes back to a case that you and I have covered since its occurrence, and that's the Gabby Petito case. The third episode, or the third most downloaded episode of Body Bags for 2025, was entitled Shocking Discovery, Forensic Anthropology, and the Suicide of Gabby Petito's Killer. I think that many people have had questions for a protracted period of time, and I don't know if you recall this previous CrimeCon that we attended. It was myself and Cheryl McCullum Mack, as people know her, and Nancy up on stage with actually Gabby's mom and her stepfather. And they talked about the case, and of course the at that session, most of the time was spent on trying to talk about Gabby's life and the fun that they had set up. But we got some insights, I think, into the world that she inhabited along with Laundrie, and also some insights, I think, that go to maybe some suspicions about the skeletal remains of Bryan Laundrie that were found down there in that swamp, Dave.
Which was why we did the episode, because there was a lot wrong with this case. And I think a lot of us who follow crime stories and things like that looked at it and went, wait a minute, man. This guy, Bryan Laundrie, goes with his fiance, Gabby Petito, cross country in a van she bought and paid for. They're traveling, and he ends up coming home to Florida alone without Gabby. Immediately, I want police out there getting him, bright lights and water dripping, whatever it takes. Where is Gabby? That's her car, and you're here. She's not. Where is she? And why did, what happened? And a lot of us don't understand, why can't they get this info? It seems so direct. And I remember at the time going, this seems so obvious. Why are we not getting answers here from the again, speaking for the family? Why are they not being told what's going on? And how can Bryan Laundrie's family be covering for him? What's going on here? How do you do this to another human being? And of course, during the coverage of what took place while we were, looking for Gabby, and, Bryan Laundrie takes off, there are people standing outside their house, if you remember, yelling, and where's Gabby? And it's like, how can you people not even, what's wrong with you that you can't stand up here and say, we don't know? I mean, give us some answer here, man. That doesn't add up, And I think that was the frustrating part of that entire case, because it wasn't just Bryan Laundrie and Gabby Petito. It was their family, the family of Gabby, wondering, well, what happened to our daughter? And then you've got Bryan Laundrie's family covering for him, knowing full well something bad has happened.
Yeah. Something, obviously, that was the case, where was Gabby? But all along, once Gabby's found, I've got a great little insight into this per that conversation we had up on stage. I was fascinated by this, but, and that was the root, obviously, of this episode. All along, after Gabby is found, out there in Wyoming, it turns out that, Laundrie's remains were within a cannon shot of his parents' domicile, also his domicile, living with mom and dad, and in a very specific area that is, and I made comment about it several times about how harsh this environment is, how hard it is on human remains once you get down.
In Florida. Right. Talking about Florida?
Yeah, they're in Florida.
And hey, to set that up, he went into this area where his family had regularly camped, and he kind of hid himself out there, without anybody knowing, right? I mean, we didn't know where Bryan Laundrie was. His parents weren't talking, and the area flooded.
They weren't talking, but when when it all came down to brass tacks, interestingly enough, his family got involved, and lo and behold, they went right to where the body was.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it really is crazy. And just this little anecdote, I think here, when we were on stage with Gabby's family, her stepdad said so. Actually, the mother said something very interesting, Dave. I believe in angels. I truly do, and I believe that they watch over us. And she had made reference to this. Did you know that when Gabby's remains were found in this area out in Wyoming, you think about scavengers, you think about how, if a body was there, that it would not be intact. And interestingly enough, when they found Gabby's remains, and they were, through the natural course of biology, they're decomposing. Okay. But Dave, her body was intact. When you get to look at Bryan Laundrie, and this was kind of one of the main thrust of this episode, he's in that swampy area. His remains are scattered. There's been feasting going on, on his remains. And you take a look, this kind of dichotomy, between the two. And you think about, and look, none of us are perfect, right? I don't know what kind of life, Gabby led or Laundrie. I can only hazard a guess. But, you see that even in death, in this particular case, at least, that her body, though decomposing, was almost pristine. His is scattered in this horrible environment where you've got rising water. You've got all manner of critters that inhabit this area. I've had all kinds of people that have reached out to me over the course of the years, what could have, happened to his body. I remember for a while people were saying, well, an alligator got him, or an alligator, hauled off part of his body. And that was inaccurate. That's not what happened. That's not how alligators work.
Isn't it funny how when somebody goes into Florida and there's marshy water, it's always gators, and it never turns out to be that way. It's never the gators, but the gators are always blamed for everything.
The gators are, they're the apex. They're the apex predator, in North America. I mean, they truly are. But what was fascinating about this case is that Bryan Laundrie, when the assessment was done on his body by the forensic anthropologist, and this is a very difficult case to work forensically, to try to gather as much of the remains that are left, the bony remains. When they did find his skull, we do know that it's well documented, he's right-handed. Well, he's got this kind of weird, atypical gunshot wound where the entrance, per the forensic anthropologist, has noted, and it's in the left aspect of his head, and it's up in kind of an odd location, almost it's not occipital, which is posterior, but it's up in the parietal area,
in the back of his head.
Well, more to the side and up. All right. That's all I'll say at this point. And I think that Gabby's stepfather has his own thoughts about this, and about what could have led to this. I found them very interesting. I'll say that much. The fact that he is deceased out there in this location, his body was found rather quickly, after his family got involved in the search. For the first time, they're actually doing something. And, lo and behold, there he was. This I know, though, Gabby, unlike many of the victims that we cover on the show, we always hear a lot about perpetrators, don't we, Dave? We always hear their names, and they linger They linger forever and ever. But in the case of Gabby Petito, her case and her name will never be forgotten. Well, here we go, Dave. We're bringing it home. We've got 2 episodes left of the most downloaded episodes of 2025 for Body Bags. And in this particular case, with these 2 episodes, they all focus on, well, let's see, let's say this. They all focus on an event, but that event actually involves 4 homicides. And you know where I'm going with this, Dave. We're going back to Moscow, Idaho, and to the slaughter of these 4 university students. And for us at number 2, the second most downloaded is entitled Explosive Proof. Maddie and Kaylee fought back against a cowardly attacker. And Dave, I gotta lay it out for you. You and I have talked about this quite a bit off air, and we talked about, and a lot of people have, I know, but for you and I, for the purposes of our show, we've talked about this a lot relative to the dynamics of what went on in that upstairs bedroom, because a lot of people thought that it began up there. Yeah.
I say we, and I'm talking about collectively, those who followed this case. I found myself reaching out and looking in a number of sources I wouldn't have normally looked at, Joe, to figure out what had transpired, because nothing made sense. You know, the problem with the entire case was that what we were told from the beginning, that they were killed in their sleep, and then what came out at the end, you know, we were piecing together along the way. If you remember, we covered this in the Dateline Leaks, that episode, where a lot of information came out that some of it was true, some of it wasn't. Yeah. But what we came up with when everything was said and done was that there was a fight, and Maddie and Kaylee fought back. And I don't know, I mean this I don't know how we could get the story that they died in their sleep, you know, to this, what we know took place. That really bothers me. Maybe it shouldn't, but it really does bother me. But based on the information that we found out from the police reports, the coroner's findings indicated that both Maddie and Kaylee had injuries consistent with a struggle. Yeah. Now, we know that Kohberger snuck into the house, and we know that his first attack was on Maddie and Kaylee. Based on the timeline that we've been given, Joe, we know that he arrives and goes up the stairs shortly after 4:00. We know that Xana Kernodle has just received her, DoorDash from Jack in the Box. Yep. And so she's awake in her room, probably with Ethan. And Kohberger goes past that room straight up the stairs into Maddie and Kaylee's room. We know that there was some noise going on up there that was heard, because we had the one of the roommates saying that she thought Maddie was playing with her dog. Yep. That noise. The physical evidence shows that Madison had wounds on her forearms and hands. Kaylee had wounds around her mouth. Her father indicated someone had pressed in to keep her quiet. She had more than 20 stab wounds. We know that both girls were beaten. Now, Joe, based on the room and where the girls were found, they put up a heck of a fight. Yeah, and as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, Alivea Goncalves talking about Kohberger's plan and how he spent all this time planning, and it came down to her sister, Kaylee, and that sheath, that knife sheath.
Yeah.
Because those were the two things that brought about evidence that put him in that room. But Joe, when we were covering this story, this was explosive new information, which is why these are the two most downloaded episodes of the year.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about that attack, though, from Kohberger.
It really paints a picture, a horrific picture. We know that, I think one of the watchwords here is containment. And when I say that, I'm talking about the attack itself. Mm-hmm. He's essentially got both of these young women pinned in. They're not going anywhere because he's in between them and a location where they could have exited, the single door that leads into this bedroom. And then you've got these objects that are within the room. I think most significant is this bed, because one of the things that has been talked about is that, one of these young women had, she's already graduated, essentially. She's moved out. She's come back to see her friend, and they are co-sleeping, in this area, which is something that they had done since they were little bitty things.
Yeah.
And when he sets upon them, where are they going to go? But again, going back, and this is what really lit a fire with me. You had mentioned the coroner early on, because I see that coroner. You don't hear a lot in the news about coroners. Okay. And because I have a special place in my life and in what I have done in my life with the training of coroners, the education of coroners, that person suddenly is thrust into the spotlight, and they're reflective of all coroners. Mm-hmm. Okay. Whether you like it or not. And I know a lot of people would say, well, that doesn't mean that all coroners. No, it doesn't. However, when you're not talked about a lot in the news and suddenly you're thrust into the spotlight. So that's what lit the little flame in me, I think, early on. And that, as I stated earlier, that those comments rose shortly after these events. So when we begin to learn about what happened in that bedroom, it goes to invalidate all of those things, those notions that were placed out there. And it really, I'm supposed to be as objective as possible. However, you kind of feel, my objectivity kind of fades into the background, when you understand that there's not, you begin to question, what kind of scientific assessment had been done at that point, even from the perspective, it begins for me to talk about, well, how were the bodies even assessed? Because what one of the big things turned out, and you mentioned this just a moment ago, Dave, about the deliveries and when he came into the room, is the assessment of time.
Right.
Well, if you're trying to tell us that they were asleep, that they died in their sleep, what kind of assessment did you actually do on the bodies as far as postmortem interval and all those things? Because as it turned out, thing didn't go to trial. And if you needed that critical bit of information, because we're all about timelines, aren't we? It's not just the injuries themselves. That goes into question your I don't know, your competency as a practitioner.
What did you do?
Right. And so and then you try to contextualize the injuries. And as we found out with Kaylee, I'm not saying that Maddie's were not brutal. It truly was. She was attacked over and over again with a sharp instrument. But Kaylee, there's so much anger involved in this, Dave. And I'm talking about fractured facial structures, the driving of this blade, into her face. And we talked about the blunt force trauma. You had mentioned it earlier do you remember there were these weird patterns that they talked about, these kind of linear, not circumventual, but there were these kind of weird looking patterns. And I felt like that those patterns matched up with the handle on a K-bar, because they're grooved. And also I remember talking about how that knife, if you look at it, the knife is a military knife. And so it's not just essentially used. I think people think military knife, that it's used as a means to attack another person. It's not, because when you're in the military, you need something, a utility knife that serves a multiplicity of purpose. If you flip that K-bar over upside down so that it's inverted, the handle itself, the end of the handle, the butt of it, looks like a hammerhead. I think it's even octagonal or pentagonal in shape. It's got edges on it.
Right.
So you can use it like in the field. If you wanted to reseal a box or you're trying to nail something up, you could flip that knife over and use it as a hammer. That's one of the things that they're seeing here, with Kaylee, and they're contained in this area. But she did, in fact, fight back. We know that she did. We've got a combination of DNA that's found beneath her fingernails, at the scene. There's contact that's going on. So no, in answer to the big question here, they did not die in their sleep, Dave. That's not a reality. It's not a real thing.
Well, the one thing we did find out beyond, upstairs, we understand that was in all probability the first attack, because it's the only one that actually makes sense when you look at what transpired. So Kohberger goes up the stairs, attacks. Now, based on other physical evidence and audio evidence, Kaylee Xana Kernodle hears something going on upstairs and goes up the stairs to check. Now, this is the Dave Mack theory of what took place, because they never actually said this out loud. There have been a lot of comments about what possibly happened, but based on everything we looked at, it sounded to me that Xana, that got her food from Jack in the Box and sitting there eating, Ethan is crashed out in the bed, sleep. And she hears something going on. It sounds more than just playing around. And it sounds, you're going to hear a struggle that sounds a lot different than anything else you've ever heard before. So you're going to go check it out. And it sounded to me that Xana went up the stairs to see what was going on. Yeah. And I think it was Xana startling Kohberger that caused him to leave that knife sheath, because he wasn't thinking at that point. It was panic. He thought he was getting away with killing these girls in private. Nobody's going to catch him. Yeah.
And that's, I think that you're spot on there. And of course, that brings us to the number one most downloaded episode of Body Bags for 2025. And it's the episode entitled Shocking Truth. Xana caught BK and fought the devil. And boy, did she ever. How many times do you think, Dave, over the course of her living in this space with her friends upstairs, how many times do you think that maybe late nights she had egressed up that staircase just to go have a chat?
Yep.
Just to talk about what your day was like, or maybe share food. Hey, the delivery's here. I'll just bring it up and we'll sit on the floor and we'll eat.
Yep.
And so this one particular time, Xana, for whatever number of reasons, whether it was she was alerted to some type of sound or something had happened. I think that going back to the comment, and I'm still interested in where this comment arises about, you can hear a person say, "I'm going to help you." And that's very sinister. Oh, my Lord. That is, and we heard about that early on, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And the fact, you begin to look back at this thing and you think about how dark this case really was. But it turns out that Xana, who we learned a lot about her family, and kind of the status of her life, just trying to make her way in this world, trying to, fit in with everybody else. She's got a boyfriend that's over with her in the person of Ethan, who's in the bed. He's, later found, it looks as though that he was in bed. We had thought, early on, there were all these things that had come up, where he may have been in the doorway. There was a lot of the speculative stuff that was floating about there. But Xana alerted. And Dave, do you think that he chased her about that floor?
I think that when she was up the stairs, I think that, like most of us, I heard something, I'm going to go check it out. And as we get closer to it, we slow down to get an eyeball. And that's when maybe he turned, maybe she gasped, maybe she, I don't know. But I think he came out of that room chasing her down the stairs. I think he caught her, and that was where the attack began, on the stairs all the way down into the room. Based on the injuries and where she was actually found, I believe that's what happened. Again, now going back to some of the things that were said, you mentioned the term of Kohberger saying, "I'm going to help you." That was something that we heard early on. And I put a lot of stock in that because it sounds like something, evil would say.
Yeah, it really does. Just so that I'm going to help you just so I can get closer to you.
Exactly.
Put your guard down. I'm here to help you. I really, there's all kinds of what ifs in this case, Dave. There always will be because we still don't have a weapon.
Right.
And there will always be all kinds of what ifs relative to it. But I find it particularly interesting that Xana, in her own way, was kind of a key, I think, to establishing the timeline and the activities. Up till that point, when she stepped out of that room, she sealed her fate, I think, at that point in time, because still, even though he was in a position where he had two victims and maybe he was only counting on one, this is something he can still control, Dave. Okay.
Right.
And as you look into those dead eyes that he has, that he wanted to be in control of everything. Xana is the red herring here. She pops onto the radar. He's alerted to her and what she's doing, that I've been spotted. Now, hell is about to follow, because I've got to kill anybody that is going to get in my way. The rest of these, the one roommate that peeked out of the door,
Dylan
she
Mortensen,
needs to get down on her knees every single day of her life and thank the sweet Lord above that she's still with us, because I think that a lot of it has to do that he was just exhausted at that point. No one will ever convince me any different that this was not a sexually motivated thing that was going on. And it's almost like a climax had taken place with him, this release, if you will. And then he's running on pure adrenaline and anger. How dare you, interrupt what I'm doing here? And, when you take the total view of this case and the dynamics of it, and also the interesting way that a lot of the data was communicated to everybody out there that's sitting and watching this every day. I don't know that there will ever be another case like this. I hope that there won't be, but you and I know that I might be a bit more jaded than you, but I think we understand that there will be something that will arise that will be absolutely horrific. I don't think that there will be any time in the foreseeable future where the names of these victims and the events of that night will be struck from our memory. It's something that will stay with us forever and ever. And Dave, I got to say to you, it's been my deep pleasure to talk about these cases and hopefully be of some service to people that try to understand the dynamics of injuries and understand forensics a little bit better, because this in and of itself is probably one of the more complicated cases that we've had to go through. I hope that I've done my best as a teacher and someone that tries to keep the public informed. It's been a great year for us. 2025 has been, and we look forward to a great 2026 with Body Bags. So I'd like to say just thank you, Dave. Thank you for everything you've done for the show and for me personally. And I have a good feeling that 2026 is going to have great things in store for both of us and for the show. What say you?
I'm right back at you. I think I'm appreciative of how you've been able to. I'm appreciative of the fact that you share your knowledge, your history, not just your book knowledge, but your history in the field to help all of us understand the crimes better, more than just the fascination, the prurient interest that many people have, to actually get into the machinations of what took place, how it happened, and what these things mean. Yeah. A lot of times we jump to conclusions. Those of us who are not educated, we think something means something that it doesn't. And you actually have a way of breaking that down to show us that something we didn't find important actually is the turn of the case. And I'm appreciative of that. It has been a great year, and I look forward to 2026. The show continues to grow, and it's because of you. And I don't know, my only recommendation is that maybe instead of doing 27 shows in a day, that maybe you take it down to 25 because, you're you have become the go-to guy by every network. And congratulations for that. I've watched you.
Oh, well, I've
watched you from the beginning to where you are now, and it's been phenomenal ride.
Well, I couldn't do it without your sage advice. And ladies and gentlemen, I got the best producer in the business. Dave Mack is on fire with everything he does. He is a great colleague, and most of all, he's a great friend. And we look forward, Dave and I both look forward. We're going to be journeying out over the course of 2026. We'll have a couple of stops along the way. I hope that we see you guys out there. Come up and chat with us. We'll be glad to entertain your thoughts and have a conversation, maybe even a cup of coffee. You never know. But thank you again, my friends. Thank you for a great 2025. And here's to the upcoming year, 2026. I pray for peace for everyone. I pray for peace for our country. And most of all, I pray for peace for the families that are left behind in the wake of all of the horror that's out there. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.